Yeah, well, thank you all for attending week 2 of BFSG's 4-week fall webinar series. My name is Braden Priest. I'm a retirement plan consultant here in BFSG's Institutional Services Division. Today, we'll be discussing budgeting, debt management, and student loans. Honestly, it's really a session going back to the basics and looking at some of the fundamentals of good personal finance. So with that, let me pass it over for introductions to Arash.
Thank you, Braden. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Arash. I'm a CPA and a certified financial planner, part of our wealth management division here in the Irvine office. I help our clients with financial planning and tax planning needs.
Great. Thanks, Arash. Appreciate it. My name is Keith Johnson, and I am a senior education specialist and financial planner with BFSG. So essentially what I do is help retirement plan participants with investment management guidance, planning for retirement, as well as various other financial planning needs. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Henry.
Hi, I'm Henry Van Buskirk. I'm a certified financial planner here with BFSG. And as a wealth manager at the firm, I work with participants, individuals, and businesses alike to construct comprehensive financial plans tailored to their unique short-term and long-term financial goals.
Great. Thank you. So as Braden said, today we're going back to the basics. Over the last few years, we have held webinars in regards to Social Security, Medicare, retirement accounts, investing in the stock market. But today's goal is to go back to the very basics. I personally think the most important thing an individual can do for their finances is to have a budget. Of course, that might be because I'm an accountant, but with all seriousness, if you are doing all the right things, if you're putting money into your retirement accounts, if you're putting money aside for your kids' college, but you're not keeping track of your expenses and racking up thousands in your credit card bills in this high interest environment, you can really damage your finances. So it's important to keep the basics of budgeting in mind and make good money habits. I'm sure many of you have seen these numbers. 46% of all Americans struggle to come up with $400 in cash for emergency. 60% of all Americans will face that emergency in 12 months or less. So a lot of people, unfortunately, are living paycheck to paycheck. But with a proper budget, you can avoid that. And on the other side, if you figure out your monthly needs when it comes to your expenses, you can direct some of your excess cash to high-yielding savings accounts, money market accounts, or even treasuries, and finally actually earn interest on your cash with low or no risk in this environment. So it's a great time to be doing some budgeting.
Great. Thanks, Arash. Appreciate it. And just to piggyback off your comments, I wanted to share results from a recent survey by CNBC, which suggests only about 57% of adults in the US are financially literate. And this is actually costing us, and this was kind of alarming to me. So in fact, in 2022, the lack of financial literacy cost Americans more than $436 billion. We're saving less, debt and bankruptcies are higher, and the lack of financial literacy is essentially perpetuating poverty, and in turn, that kind of affects the entire society. So this is really, even though it's a basic topic, it's really important stuff. And many of you, if we take a look at the screen here, may recognize this photo. He is known as the Oracle of Omaha, Warren Buffett, and he does have some sage advice for us. Don't save what is left after spending, but spend what is left after saving. So saving for retirement, this should almost be viewed as like a fixed income expense, like rent, mortgage, whatever the case. It's all about paying yourself first by contributing to your 401k plan, IRAs, savings accounts, things like that. So this involves monitoring and managing your finances. With that being said, I'm going to turn it back over to Braden, where he'll be launching our first interactive poll of the day. So Braden, take it away.
All right, so I will launch the poll here. And I'll go ahead and read the question for those who aren't able to attend the live session. We do have a on-demand replay, so I will read the question for those folks as well. But go ahead and select your answer. The question is, how would you describe your ability to manage your finances? I am an expert. I do okay. I pray I have money each time I have a transaction, or this is why I'm on the call today. There we go. So it looks like the most common answer being I do okay at about 67%, followed by this is why I'm on the call today at 21%, 9% for I pray I have money each time I have a transaction, and 3% saying I am an expert.
Awesome.
So back to you.
Thanks, Braden. Appreciate it. What do you think? Arash, Henry, thoughts, comments on the poll?
Well, it's good to see that almost 70% are doing okay. So hopefully this will be a good refresher and go over some of the topics that we have for them. And also for those ones that are joining us, we're going to teach you how to create a budget.
Yep.
So you're in the
Yeah,
right place.
and don't feel bad. Everybody has to start somewhere. So that's why we're all on the call today, and we'll help out.
Yeah, and if you do have questions, things like that, we'll talk more about this towards the end, but we have resources for you available if you have questions, and we'll go into more detail later on. So, okay, so when we talk about budgeting and debt management, it really, when you look at this slide, it all starts here. Are you tracking your cash flow? In other words, do you understand your gross pay from your net pay? What expenses are you tracking? Are you tracking them at all? Do you have an idea of what your net worth is, or essentially what the value of your assets are versus what you owe? We go online right now, there are countless calculators that can help track this information. And in most cases, though, if you're contributing to an employer-sponsored retirement plan, you should be able to find handy calculators to access your cash flow, net worth, track all of that right on the company website. So that's a great starting point or resource for you just to understand this in a little more depth.
Great. Thank you, Keith. So let's get started with budgeting. So there are a couple of very key steps when it comes to creating a successful budget that we're going to cover today. And basically there are 5 steps, and we are going through each one of these steps through a template. And we're going to share this template with you upon request after this call. So feel free to reach out to us. So the steps are, first one is determine your income. So the very beginning, we want to know how much income you're receiving every month. The second step, of course, is figuring out your expenses. That would be the non-discretionary and discretionary expenses. So the fixed versus the wants. And then finally, we're also going to have a section for savings and goals. Then we're going to talk about picking a budget plan that works best for you. In a few slides from here, we will discuss a couple of budgeting plans that may suit your needs the best. And finally, we'll chat about tracking your spending. Of course, a budget will not be much of a use if you're not keeping to it and if you're not tracking your spending to ensure you're staying within the limits that you set for yourself. So let's get started with step number 1. Determining.
And really quickly, Arash, just to mention something here. I do hundreds of financial plans on an annual basis. That discretionary piece is pretty important because I'll sit down and we'll talk about, okay, how much money is going out of the household. The non-discretionary, that's fixed. So it is what it is. But in many cases, folks are spending a lot more on the discretionary stuff and they're not recognizing it. So that's really important to drill down on. And that's why we're talking about the budget here.
Exactly. Great point. We definitely want to spend the time to go through your expenses, and we'll get to the expenses in the next slide. But on this slide, let's first cover your income. So the first thing you want to do is to review your income, how much money is coming in every month. So for this presentation, we want to do a simple case study to help you kind of visualize the numbers in this template. So we have a couple here. John and Jane. Jane is making $145,000. John is making $95,000 a year. So together, the income is about $240,000. And after the contributions to their retirement account, about 7%, the taxes withheld from their paycheck, they get about $12,890 a month. So that's the amount that's coming to their bank account every month and getting deposited there, and that's what's available for them to spend every month. So you could also figure out how much your income is by looking at your bank account and the deposit that is made by your employer, or you're looking at your paycheck to see the net amount, because you want to look at the net amount. That's the money that's available to you every month. And if you have additional sources of income, for example, if you have a side job that you're getting some money from, you want to enter that information here as well. If you have a rental income, or there's specific interest and dividend income that you receive every month that you're using for your cash flow needs, you would enter that information there. Also, if you're receiving some spousal or child support or any other type of income that is available to you, you want to account for it in this part of the budget. So that will total up all of your income that is available to you for the month. Next step is figuring out your expenses. So this is probably the most tedious and time-consuming part. I know it's very painful to log into every single account, looking at the figures for different utility bills, how much you're spending on credit cards, and it might take a little while to do this, but that extra effort that you're putting at the get-go will have some accurate figures for you. And going forward, you don't have to spend as much time because you have knocked out most of the information already. So for your expenses, the best thing to do, it would be to separate out your non-discretionary expenses from your discretionary or the wants. So that way you can see exactly how much your needs are versus your wants. So here on the left-hand side of this budget template, we have the non-discretionary expenses. This includes the housing, such as your rent or mortgage. If you own your property, you would enter your property taxes, home insurance, utilities there. Then on transportation, you have those costs as well. Then another non-discretionary expense would be your groceries, your insurance needs. So for this couple, they have some life insurance that they would put here as well. You would put your debt management payments here as well. This would be if you had any student loans, your healthcare expenses, or any additional utilities that you may have. And also, if, for example, in this couple, they are saving for emergency fund. They just bought a house, so they depleted their emergency fund. So they're building back that up. So every individual or family should have about 3 to 6 months of expenses set aside in cash so they can access to it in an event of emergency. So you want to account for that in your budget as well, so you can build up that emergency fund. And on the right-hand side is the discretionary expenses. So these are the wants. These are the things that could really get out of hand if you're not keeping track of. So these are restaurants, the takeout costs, if your entertainment expenses, such as clothing, electronics, and everything else as well. So you want to keep those figures here in the right-hand side of the budget template so you can add them up and see how much exactly you're spending in non-discretionary and discretionary expenses. Again, you want to put extra time here to really drill down and see how much your expenses are so you have accurate figures and being true to yourself.
Yep. Definitely creating those good habits, that's for sure. So.
And here in step 3, if you have any money left over, you may want to be budgeting for your short-term and long-term goals. So short-term could be something like a new vacation or electronic equipment that you're looking to purchase. And long-term goals could be, saving up more money for down payment of a larger house or putting money aside for education fund for the kids. So you want to account for these on a monthly basis and have that incorporated in your template. Finally, at the bottom, we can see that it's important to total up all these figures to see how much your total income is, how much your non-discretionary expenses and discretionaries are, and along with your goals for savings. And then you'll see how much money is left over at the end of the month. And it's important to see how much is left over, because if you're overspending and you're negative, then you have to take some action and correct that and reduce some of your spending so you're not going in debt. And on the other hand, if you have some money left over, you may want to save more and direct that money into a higher yielding savings accounts, so you're actually earning some interest. So this is basically how you construct a budget. Again, it may take a few hours to comb through the numbers, but you want to put that hours in there to have a peace of mind, have a better handle on your finances, and take action if you need to.
Yep. And again, just to reiterate, I mentioned this earlier, taking advantage of your company sponsored retirement plan. So essentially what you're doing here, you're putting your savings on autopilot, paying yourself first, keeping in mind you should always strive to contribute as much as your employer may be matching in the form of contributions on your behalf. So that's free money that we don't want to leave on the table. So that's really important.
Exactly. And step number 4 here, we have the different budgeting plans. So everybody has their own unique way of approaching when it comes to budgeting and finances. And there are a lot of budgeting plans out there that may suit you the best. For example, some popular budgeting plans are here on this slide. We have the envelope system. This is a little bit tedious for me, but some people use it and it is, they have had success with it. You can watch YouTube videos of people actually doing this. What they do is that they put a specific dollar amount for each category, like car repair, Christmas gifts, clothing, and they spend that money throughout the month. And once it runs out, they basically don't have any more money to spend on clothing or the wants. So it's something that has been useful and people have success with it. Another popular one is 50-30-20 budget rule. So in this one, you put 50% of your income towards essentials, 30% towards wants, and 20% towards savings. So you have allocated a specific percentage to each of these categories. And finally, quite a popular one is the zero-based budgeting. So basically, each dollar is assigned expense to it, and you spend all of that money, and at the end of the day or month, you're left with $0. That is also very popular, and there's other budgeting plans out there as well. But these seem to be the most popular ones. And before I pass it on to Keith, I just want to emphasize Warren Buffett's quote again, and I know we mentioned a couple of times, is you want to pay yourself first before doing this budgeting, because what will happen is that you will create a habit and adjust your spending. And that way you're not neglecting savings and savings for retirement, because it's very important to be putting money away at this high inflationary times for retirement.
100%. Yeah. And Social Security, it's just not going to cut it. So the onus is on us as workers in the US to save. And you have so many tools available again through your company plans that will allow you to do that. So some additional resources beyond what Arash just had mentioned. If you're really interested in drilling down on your budget, check out Mint, Quicken, YNAB, Good Budget, Honeydew. I'd recommend looking at some or all of these to see if there's a service that you feel most comfortable with and navigating on a regular basis. So again, it's all about creating those good habits when we talk about managing finances. And it takes a little bit to get into a good habit. Okay, so I think right now, Braden, do we have another poll we're going to launch for the group?
Yes, we do. So let me go ahead and pull that up. So the question is, approximately what percentage of people say that debt is ruining their quality of life? 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%, or almost everyone? And as you can see the results, it is spread across the different responses, but the most common, 41%, being 50% of people, followed by 25% each saying either 40% or almost everyone, and 4% saying 20%, with the remaining saying 30%. So it seems like our most common answers there are about half of people said about 50%.
Yeah, great. And that makes sense because we have seen recent data that shows the credit card balances are ticking up and people are relying on credit card and debt more. And unfortunately, this high inflation environment, that is a result of what, everything getting more expensive. So again, goes back to budgeting. So if you budget properly, hopefully that will help you with the debt management.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think approximately 1/3, 33% of people say their current biggest financial priority is paying down debt. And more than half of people, they're worried about getting out of debt. And then again, another almost third actually say their level of debt is ruining their quality of life. And when we talk about that, and Arash, Henry, maybe you can chime in on this, There's good debt and there's bad debt. Like mortgage debt, for example, could be considered good debt. It's
Mhm.
that high interest revolving credit card debt, things like that, student loans that can really impede on your overall retirement plan.
Absolutely. I mean, some of the debt that we currently have, and for example, the mortgage that you mentioned, if you have a mortgage that is less than 5%, even, really a lot of mortgages right now are in the threes. So that is really good debt because that's pretty much free money in this high interest environment. So you don't want to pay that off early because, you're taking advantage of that low interest rate. But it is the credit card debts. I mean, some of the ones that I've recently seen while doing financial planning were in the 29% range that I couldn't even put it into our software because our limit was 25%, and it's just ridiculous. So you want to take advantage of some offerings some other places have and lure that credit card interest if you do have credit card debt, because you want to be mindful and checking your statements because some of these banks are just taking up those interest expenses.
Yep. No, that's a great point, Arash. Thank you. And speaking of credit, this is a perfect segue. When it comes to credit and manage your debt, why is that so important? Well, number one, you'll have an easier time either renting a home or an apartment or purchasing a home. You can get better rates on car purchases or even homeowners insurance. And when you go to borrow, you'd be more entitled to lower interest rates when you are borrowing. Bottom line, good credit better prepares you for the future. And some of the factors that affect your credit score. Number one, paying your bills on time. And I can't harp on that enough. This makes up approximately 35% of your overall credit score, followed by the actual amount that you owe, the length of credit history, new credit, and then the mix of credit, whether it's home, auto, revolving credit, those all have an impact. But this pie chart is pretty handy when you stop to think about this. And again, you'll have access to all of this information when we're done. So at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Henry, where he's going to go into some detail about managing and paying down debt. So I will turn it over to you, Henry.
Thank you, Keith. To highlight two methodologies for paying down debt over time, I have on the right-hand side the avalanche method, and on the left-hand side the snowball method. They both are trying to answer the question, how do I get this debt paid off? How do I prioritize which debts to pay off? How do I stay motivated? And how do I do it the fastest? Avalanche method mathematically is going to be the fastest way to do that. However, it's hard to stick with. The snowball method is going to be the one where you're going to stay motivated for the longest period of time. So to illustrate, I'm going to use an analogy. I'm a big NBA basketball fan, and say the avalanche method is similar to the 2017 Houston Rockets, where they're just chucking threes and running up the scoreboard. It's going to get you the win the fastest. However, it's hard to stay motivated when those threes aren't falling because life gets in the way. Snowball method, that would be like the Bucks when they won their championship with Giannis Antetokounmpo. It was just layups and dunks, just going in there, getting the easy buckets, checking them off in your to-do list, which is what the snowball method does, is you highlight it in a to-do list one by one with the smallest balance debt first and end with the largest balance debt last. That's how you stay motivated over time. However, life isn't necessarily black and white, snowball method, avalanche method. It's really shades of gray, and you're doing a mixture of the two. And to help find a plan that's right for you and something that you can stick with, we have a debt payoff planner tool that we can help you with there. So just to illustrate on the next slide why we keep talking about credit card and other high interest debt and why it can be so backbreaking over time, is you see $10,000 of credit card debt over 30 years turns into $45,000. at a 20% interest rate, and Arash and Keith and I have seen interest rates at 29%. So in this example, you're actually one of the lucky ones. Congratulations there. But what this is saying is you're spending $2,000 every year for 30 years for the luxury to use the bank's card. It's fun for the bank, not so fun for your wallet. So you might be straddled with some of the debts that we've alluded to already. And I just like to transition into student loan debt if you're a new college graduate. And if you feel like it's insurmountable, you have 5-figure student loan debt or 6-figure student loan debt, you come to our firm, oh, I have $38,000 in debt, what do I do? Don't feel concerned, you're not alone. I use that number on purpose because the average debt in student loan debt in America right now is $38,000. So it's important to frame what your plans are with your loved ones on how they're going to pay off that debt, and have that sit down conversation with loved ones looking to go to college on how they're going to feasibly get that monkey off of their back. Because it's no secret that college is expensive. If we go to the next slide, we're going to illustrate the impact over 60 years of time, what inflation can do. If we look on the left-hand side, the cost of a nursing degree at the University of Pennsylvania was $1,250. Fast forward to 2020 school year, that same degree at that same institution was $53,000. Nothing changed, just the time and 6% inflation. Community college could be a viable option for you, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's how my mom got her nursing degree and why I use this example. She didn't go to University of Pennsylvania, but it stands true to be the same. The other thing to keep in mind is if your dream school is out of state tuition is more expensive on average than in-state tuition. We're working with a client right now whose daughter's going to the Arizona State University, and she's a California resident. She's really enjoying it in Arizona, and she tuned into the webinar last week with Paul and Connie and learned that it's cheaper to live in Arizona than it is in California if we're looking at an income tax perspective. I'm still in California. I haven't exactly learned my lesson yet. I'm still paying the sunshine tax, but that's okay. I enjoy it here. But my point is that she's looking into the requirements to get that in-state eligibility for that in-state tuition at Arizona State University. And that alone can save the family $60,000 over the next 3 years for the rest of the time that she's at that school. So it's prudent to check on those guidelines and see what's available to you so you can plan effectively. Because if you're not writing this down, if you're not taking the time to budget it out, then if we go to the next slide here.
Henry, I just want to chime in here really quickly,
Sure.
if that's all right. So this is very timely. So my last meeting yesterday, I was working with a couple. They live in California, and their son is now going to school in Boston, and this is not accounted for any of this, and it just popped into my head. They're spending like $20,000 a year to go back and forth and see him too. So it's all the ancillary expenses as well. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So if you're paying $100 grand to go to a school or whatever the case, you need to tack on additional expenses on top of that.
Definitely, yeah. It's not just the school you go to, it's the expenses along the way, definitely.
That's right.
You have to account for that. Because if you're not writing this down, if you're not accounting for it and just saying, I have 2 years left in nursing school, I need to borrow $100,000. On the right-hand side, over time, that over 10 years turns into $130,000 out of your pocket. If, say, grandma and grandpa are going to help you out, or you're going to have some help from other family members, and you only need $40,000, That's only 52,000 out of your pocket. I say only 52, but relative to 130, that's not as backbreaking to you when you just graduate from school.
Yep.
So you've decided, okay, I'm going to go to college. It's right for me. What federal loan options are available here? And to highlight these, I'm going to start on the left-hand side at the most preferential and end at the right-hand side, the least preferential here. The subsidized loan, it's most preferential since the government is on the hook for those interest payments while you're in school. And then you're not on the hook until 6 months after you do the whole pomp and circumstance with the cap and gown. Then you start to be on the hook. The unsubsidized loan in the middle, that's at a higher interest rate, so not as preferential, and you're on the hook immediately. However, you don't need to show any need for financial aid or assistance. The last lever that we really want to pull here is that Direct Plus loan, sometimes referred to as Parent Plus, but it's going to be the highest interest rate at a little north of 8%. And they're going to check your credit score, and the government's going to want those interest payments immediately. So that's a little primer on those options. You've decided which of these you're going to mix and match that's right for you. How are you going to pay these off? We have some traditional repayment plans I'd like to highlight again here, starting from at the top, the most preferential, to the bottom at the least preferential. Standard repayment plan is just a fixed interest rate over a 10-year period, and it's going to be the least money out of your wallet over that time period. Now, the extended repayment plan, if you're getting started out in your career and don't want to pay as much into the student loan that you maybe could with the standard repayment plan, that's definitely okay. You're starting out at that lower monthly payment. However, you're going out for 25 years, and that's going to be the most money out of your pocket since you're on the hook for the longest period of time. And these are all dependent on your loan balance, and there's some of these repayment plans that are income-driven repayment plans here. I just want to highlight a few of them here on the next slide. So as I alluded to, these are all based on your income, not based on the loan balance, and they're not profession specific. And I want you to bookmark that last statement if you are a public service employee, because there's another form of forgiveness that we'll get into a little bit later in the presentation. But just want to highlight these examples here. And you're probably asking the question, which one of these is right for me? And frankly, the answer is it depends. And it depends on your cash flow needs, and it depends on your current situation. Fortunately, the government has done a lot of the legwork for us, and you can go to studentaid.gov/IDR, and we'll put that in the chat a little later in the meeting so that you can visit that at your leisure. But what you're doing there is you're going to that website, putting in your financials, your key demographic information. You get a report that states what you currently have, and it's going to compare and contrast all of these different options available to you. And then you pick one you find that's right for your budget, for your wallet, and you do the application. You reassess every year because the government's going to want to recheck your income every year. And there you go, you're signed up for a new repayment plan. So just to highlight one of these, I have the SAVE plan. And our example, we have Alexander, who went to that same website, studentaid.gov/IDR. Turns out he can save $90 a month through doing the SAVE plan and for following those instructions I alluded to. And this SAVE plan has gotten some recent revamps due to what happened with COVID and with Congress recently over the last couple of years, where that that discretionary income that the government is looking at, where they're saying, oh, well, you make $100,000 a year. We say 10,000 of that can be earmarked for student loan debt repayment. They have a number in mind. You may have another number in mind. The government is going to win in this situation. However, the government has lowered that threshold down to $5,000 in that scenario. And the government is also stepping in and helping out with paying some of those interest payments so that there's no more negative amortization, which is just a fancy way to say you have a debt and you have that balance and it goes up over time, even though you're making those interest payments, it's still increasing the debt balance. So the government is effectively eliminating that. And just to transition over to public service loan forgiveness, or PSLF, if you're a public service employee, you're eligible for this type of forgiveness if you signed up for one of these repayment plans we alluded to earlier, you've been in it for at least 10 years, and you're part of one of these qualifying employers like a military service person, a charitable organization, and you're doing it full time. If you want to find out if you qualify, you can visit one of these links here to see if your employer falls under that umbrella. And why I'm spending some time on this slide is because life happens and maybe you want to change careers in the future. If a headhunter comes knocking to your door and says, we're going to give you 20,000 more in salary, but we're a non-qualified employer, and you have $50,000 in student loan debt that was forgiven, it's possible it could be unforgiven because you would not be eligible under PSLF no longer. So like anything in life, you have to read the fine print. It's not always greener grass, but just take the time to make those important decisions and understand the consequences there.
Yeah, and those are some of the topics we can help out with. In fact, Henry and I have been talking about one case in particular. So it is really important because once you decide to make that decision, you go to a new employer. For all intensive purposes, it's irrevocable at that point. So we want to see how that affects everything.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I know we spent a lot of time talking about a number of different topics today, but really all we're trying to stress is bring home one singular point. We don't want future you to be upset at current you because current you didn't plan effectively for future you. We want both of them to be happy. How do they be happy? We get a budget in place. We get a comprehensive financial plan done. We get a debt payoff planner done that you can stick with and be motivated with. And it just takes time. You got to trust the process. If you are a 76ers basketball fan, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You got to trust the process. It works. It just takes time.
So one thing here really quickly when we talk about, well, the first bullet actually, the 529 plans. For parents, if you have kids going to school, it's a balance between, okay, planning for retirement and then funding the kids' education. And again, that's important to understand. I mean, some folks want their kids to have no student loans, others are fine with it. But what you don't want to do is sacrifice your own retirement in order to subsidize your children's education, if that makes sense. Because for all intents and purposes, there are loans for college, there aren't for retirement. So there's a very delicate balance there that we always like to talk about.
Really. And there's a difference between if you want to fund, say, public school versus private school. We typically recommend if you're thinking, well, I want my son to go to USC, you don't need to fund all 4 years of private school. Just focus on fully funding a public school. Because in reality, if they're getting into USC, there's going to be some grants. They're a very bright person. So there's going to be some assistance along the way. So it's a tricky thing when we're doing 529 planning and managing how much to go into that plan and making sure we focus on you and then the child.
Yep.
Got to take care of you first.
100%. Yeah.
Mm.
Thank you, Henry. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
So with that being said, this was a lot of information in a very short amount of time. So I will leave our contact information up here. I really thank everyone for attending the session. Hopefully you got something out of it. I'll turn it back over to Braden and we can see if we have any questions we can answer right now.
Absolutely. So thanks again for the great presentation, Keith, Arash, and Henry. Again, before we start the Q&A portion of the event, we'd just like to thank everyone again. If you need to drop off early, that's no problem. Do want to thank you for your time and for your attendance today. We hope that you found the content timely, valuable, and useful as you're planning for your future. As I mentioned earlier, we'd love to hear your feedback, including any topics of interest that you'd like to see for future webinars. I just pasted a link to the survey in the chat box, along with some other resources for you that we talked about today. As we begin the Q&A portion, please don't hesitate to continue typing questions throughout this session. We'll answer as many questions as possible before hitting the bottom of the hour. Should we not get to your question before our time runs out, again, please do not hesitate to reach out to us directly. So now for the first question. There's a lot of interest in this one is, do we have an Excel sheet template that we could send out where folks can easily input their monthly income and expenses?
Yes, the template that we just went through today in our presentation, we have it in an Excel format. We'll be happy to share with you. And if you send us an email, we'd be glad to send you a copy of that template.
And you can send that to financialplanning@bfsg.com.
And I will paste that email inbox into the chat as well for those that are interested. Next is, in today's current economic state of affairs, if you're someone who believes that a recession is looming in the next, say, 6 months or so, where's the best place to put that discretionary money that you have saved up?
So it depends on your goals here. If it's within that short of a time frame, high yield savings accounts or even treasury bills, something that's not subjected to market risk is generally where we would recommend that going. If it's for a long-term goal, say 6, 7, 8 years in the future, then it may be something to look at depending on your risk tolerance investing in the stock market. But again, just for short term, because we can't predict what's going to happen in the next couple months, just put it in something that's not subjected to market risk and where you can get a guaranteed interest rate.
Great. Yes, that is basically what we were telling our clients here as well. I mean, you can't time the stock market. We don't know how the market is going to react. But treasuries are a good option under 1 year. If you're looking at it, they're paying over 5%. They're state income tax free. So that's one benefit that differentiates it from like CDs where you lock up your money, where you have to pay federal and state. So treasuries are a good option. Money market accounts are, some of them paying close to 5%. So that is also a good option if you're looking for a short term to just park your cash to earn some interest.
Yeah, and I think everyone on this call, everyone's situation is totally different. Your risk tolerance for investing is totally different. So we have resources here. It's important to look holistically at the entire portfolio. So if you're interested in having that analyzed, we can help you out on that front as well to see how all these different investments complement one another. So that's very important.
Next question coming in is, does utilizing too little of my available credit negatively impact my credit score?
No. That's the short answer there. No, it does not. The most important thing, again, as we go back to paying the bills on time, the revolving credit, if you're charging gas or going into a grocery store, as long as you're paying that off and they see that activity, that's the most important thing as far as credit reporting. So underutilization is not a bad thing. Overutilization is a bad thing.
Just to add to that, another thing that I've seen in my research when it comes to credit score is that if you have a very old credit card that you're not using, You might just keep it, don't close it, because closing a very old account does impact the credit score negatively. So,
Mhm.
but I don't believe underutilization will impact it
Not at
much, if
all.
any.
Nope.
Mhm.
Question is, and there's a number of folks that have the same questions. How do I go about, telling my friends and family that, I might not be able to cover or buy them a birthday or Christmas or a wedding gift this year because I'm trying to save uh, for my future or pay down debt?
That comes down to family dynamics a bit. I mean, if it's my family, then just tell them straight up, I'm not going to give you anything. I had to focus on me. And they love you, they understand.
Yeah, they'll understand the
Yeah.
circumstances for sure.
Next question, what are some good examples of high yield savings accounts? And what is the recommended amount to open a high yield savings account with?
Yeah. So some plans that we're working with recently, we're talking about, say, American Express or Synchrony Bank. We just want to focus on the credibility of the institution that you're having the high yield savings account with. Because as you remember earlier with what happened with Silicon Valley Bank or some of these other smaller credit unions, is yes, they were higher interest rates that were available, but we don't want to be worried about their solvency. And we want to make sure that they're going to pay out the interest rate and you have access to that money. So that's why
And
we're looking at things like Amex or Synchrony, and we can provide a couple links for those. And the other part of that question, just whatever amount is right for you. You want to do better than just a account earning 0% interest at, say, Chase or something like that.
no, exactly. Chase is like at 0.01%. Discover
Mhm.
is a good option. Capital One, American Express, Synchrony. You want
Mhm.
that presence and, like Henry said, that credibility, and make sure that they're going to be around for a while. Those are all safe bets, and they're all earning over 4%. So that can be very material in your savings account.
Mhm.
Yes, and also, as long as the amount is under $250,000, so it's FDIC insured, that is also something to keep in mind because with this banks collapsing, you don't want to take too much risk. Um, a lot of internet banks are nowadays are paying more, but definitely want to make sure it's a reputable company, so you're not putting your money at risk. Have to deal with the headache of them going under.
100%.
Is a home equity line wise to pay off student debt? Are there scenarios where that might make sense?
No, it's more of just an interest rate game. We would just look and plan out what that home equity line is, what the debt balance is, and the interest rate on the loan is, and then just see which one would make sense for you at that point. So I'm happy to, review your situation if you'd like, and then we can go over the pros and cons of both paying off the student loan debt or and utilizing the HELOC or just whatever other scenarios you'd like through a financial plan.
Yeah, and I think it's a whole cash flow thing too. So in the event in the future you're not able to pay that back, it's not like they take part of the house, the bank will take the entire house. So there are a ton of considerations surrounding that decision for sure.
When it comes to debt payments, whether that's student loans or credit cards, what percentage do you view should be going towards those types of debt payments each month? Should it just be what is left over after non-discretionary expenses? Are there any rules of thumb there when it comes to the percentage that should be going towards those types of kind of fixed debt payments?
Well, it kind of has to do with your comfortability and how fast you want the debt paid off. Like, but just for easy numbers, say after taxes and everything, your net paycheck is, $2,000 after you paid all your non-discretionary expenses. Then math would say you have $2,000 to pay off debt. But we want you to have fun and enjoy your life. We don't want you eating top ramen every day. So realistically, that number is probably like 1,500 or $1,200. It really just depends on your situation. So that's why I stress writing it down and doing a debt payoff plan with us, or just writing it down yourself and just seeing how much I have left after all of my non-discretionary expenses are taken care of, and how much am I comfortable with reasonably to actually pay off the debt. Because of course you want to pay it off as fast as you can, but you got to be realistic with it too.
Exactly. And also, again, goes back to your budget. You want to have those figures in your budget to see how much cash is left every month and put aside some money for emergency. We commented on this earlier on for emergency fund to have 3 to 6 months of your expenses set aside just in case something unfortunate happens with the car, with the house. You're not going back to the credit card. That way you have some funds aside. And also, if there is a loss of job, you have that access to cash so you're not reliant on the credit card. But if you feel comfortable with your emergency fund and you have excess cash, then you can throw money towards the highest interest credit card so to pay that down. But again, goes back to the budget, like Henry said, having some money set aside, and then the extra can be really going towards that. But it's unique to each situation because we don't have a specific percentage here.
Mhm.
What if just rent alone equals half of my take-home pay? Any suggestions on, how to address that?
Unfortunately, it's the reality right now, especially in California. A lot of money is going toward rent, and rents are getting higher. But goes back to the budgeting. I would have to say, it just you have to see where you can cut to minimize the expenses. Unfortunately, it's just what is happening in the real estate market has increased the rent so much that is impacting everybody's cash flow.
Mhm.
Right. And at the same time, I think you're getting much more value out of renting right now than actually purchasing a home from everything I've read and seen. So it like Arash said, it almost is what it is at this juncture.
What about some of the best options for credit card consolidation? Consolidating loans, different programs to help consolidate those different debts.
Maybe a SoFi. What do you guys think about SoFi? Some of those big companies where you can do that. Lending Tree.
Yep.
I don't know. Maybe you guys can chime in on that one.
Yeah, those are some good options there.
There are some good options, and you should always be on the lookout for some credit card companies offering, zero interest so you can transfer your balance. It's just it's a matter of researching to see what is out there and minimizing your interest rate, basically to transferring it to the lower balance. I am personally not familiar with any specific one that consolidates everything together, but what I've seen with clients, if they have a couple of credit cards and a HELOC, and you see there is money available in HELOC and they have some money for emergency, then I will tell them, okay, why don't you utilize this HELOC because it's at 7%, whereas the credit card at Wells Fargo is at 20 to pay off some of that. But again, goes back, you have to look at the budget, you have to look at the emergency funds before you're doing these things to making sure you're not falling back into the credit card trap again. But there's a lot of offers that come in, and if you see them, definitely something you want to take advantage of at a zero interest where you can transfer balances at a minimum cost.
Are there any preferred programs to assist with budgeting? I know we talked about some today. There's programs like Mint or Personal Capital, those types of things. Any that you've seen clients have success with in the past?
So yeah, mint.com is a popular one. A lot of clients that we work with, participants and individuals, I advise them to link their accounts to the financial plan so that we can track the budget over time, so that we can understand what's discretionary, what's non-discretionary, how much is left over to pay down debt. And again, we're not here to tell you how to live your life. We're just here to show the numbers and to see what the implications of your life are to your finances. So we have a similar site to mint.com with eMoney that can do a lot of that for you. But Heath alluded to a few other good ones as well earlier in the presentation.
Yeah, those are great apps as well. I personally use a simple Excel template to keep track of it. Another way you can keep track of your expenses that I've done is that I use certain credit cards, for example, for online purchases, subscription, another one for daily need. That way I can keep track of how much I'm spending on various things. and then go back to the budget and making sure you're within limit. Also, that is a little more time consuming than perhaps some of these apps. But when you have a few accounts and they're not all linked together, that is also something to keep in mind by separating out your expenses in different accounts so you can better keep track of it.
Next question is it better to have no credit cards while working on your credit score or to have a credit card or two to start building some credit?
Yeah, funny thing is you do want to start building some credit. It's just how American society works is we like to have a little bit of debt or just the ability to pay it off and to show those companies that you can. So just a little bit of credit card debt and just paying that off each month, full balance. There's nothing wrong with that just to get started.
I think if you have a couple credit cards, because I mean, think about travel. If you go anywhere, you essentially need a credit card, rent a car, hotel, the whole thing. So having two cards and like Henry said, paying those off at the end of the month, that will actually improve your score over the long term.
Mm-hmm.
You definitely want to have at least two credit cards. Two, I think, is great because you're building that credit, showing the companies that you're paying back your debt on time, and having that history of debt payment. It'll help you with your credit score in the long term. And at the future, you want to purchase a home, a car, you get a better rate when you have this better credit history. And also, there are benefits to credit cards. If you're paying at the end of the month in full, then you're getting some cash back, you're earning some rewards. If you manage it properly and you pay your credit cards in full, you actually benefit from these cards, even though they're very high interest, but you're not paying any interest because you're paying it in full and you're getting cash back and other rewards. So there are benefits to credit cards as much as there are hurtful to some families.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sorry, just the other thing to keep in mind too is if you're changing jobs because you're advancing in career and your income goes up drastically, for example, then it would behoove you to just check with your local bank on increasing your credit limit because the bank is going to look at your direct deposits coming in, thinking that, okay, you can handle more debt if you wanted to, and that can also help out.
In reference to increased costs and expenses every year, as you know, we've been going through this period of inflation more recently. How much increase would you calculate to include in your budget for cost of living, price adjustments and inflation?
So we typically do 3% when we're doing a financial plan. If we're doing healthcare, it's 5 to 6%. If it's college, we're doing 6%. It just depends on the type of expense on how much to increase it by.
Exactly. I think with general inflation, the Federal Reserve over the long term targets it at 2%. But in an effort to take a really conservative approach, like Henry said, we do use 3%. And that 1% increase may not seem like a lot, but over the life of a retirement plan has a very material effect. So we're very conservative in that approach there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. That is what is for a project in the long term. But as you're doing your budgeting, even if you do it once a year, go back to the figures and update your numbers. That's the best way to really keep track of what's going on. Some expenses gonna, as Henry mentioned, some like medical and education may be going higher than that inflation figure. And with real estate, expenses are going to be more if you're renting. If you own your home, you're fixed with the mortgage, but insurance costs continue to going up, especially in California. It's projected to be going up much more in the next few years. So it is something that you want to look at it line by line once a year. I know it takes a few hours to go through it sometimes, but you're doing yourself a lot of benefits by going through the numbers once a year to just keeping track of it.
Can interest rates on credit cards be negotiated?
Yes, you could call them if you have debt problems, or if you even call your credit card companies and ask for a reduction in interest rate. I've seen people had success with it. It's not never hurts to ask, you're just asking and they will drop the rates in most of the cases. I have seen people negotiate it to answer that question.
Yeah, and generally you have to show evidence of hardship. So just economic hardship or anything like that. And that's something to keep in mind when you're making that call.
I know we touched on this a little bit, but any quick tips on raising your credit score? In terms of credit card bills, how many payments should you make? What amount? How many days before the due date? Just I think general tips on good practices to try to increase your credit score.
Where was that slide?
Yeah, it goes back, as we get to the slide, it goes back to the utilization. You want to keep it below that 25% mark that Keith mentioned. And also having a couple accounts open, not closing your very oldest accounts. Those also help. And just making payments on time. It doesn't necessarily have to be early as long as you're not making late payments. That will also help boost your credit score.
Yeah, the payment history again is the most heavily weighted right here. And then next is credit utilization. So from the previous question, if I'm not utilizing the credit, if you're just putting literally one item on a credit card per month and then paying it off, that will increase your score right here. So again, that part's very heavily weighted. And then when you get down the road, you're buying a car, you're buying a home. These are kind of minority percentages here, but these are the two biggies. I mean, when you stop and think about this, right? Between right here and right here is 65-ish%. So it's just paying everything on time, keeping that utilization low. So that's kind of where we're going with that. So.
Yeah, and also another item is that if you're looking to open a new credit or get some loan or anything, inquire whether or not that agency is doing a soft inquiry or hard inquiry. With a soft inquiry, it doesn't impact your credit, but if they're doing a hard inquiry, it does. So there is also that aspect of it. You don't want to open too many accounts at once, because that will impact your score negatively. But I've also heard that if you're looking to make a purchase, like get a mortgage rate or an auto purchase, the credit score companies will look at if you have went to several places and got they check your credit, they will only count it as once during a certain time period. So there is also that aspect of the credit score impact to the credit score as well.
Yeah, so that's I think it's like a 30-day window.
I think so
So
too.
yeah, if you're looking for a car or something, they understand you're shopping around. So even though the initial credit hit is a hard hit, all the other ancillary ones they will not be. So you have that time horizon or window, so it doesn't affect your credit anymore.
Any tips or suggestions for helping, say, a senior in high school start to build their personal credit?
I mean, if they're working, you can always open up an account with them. Like for example, when I started working at 16, my dad opened a card with me, and just to kind of build up that habit and that history. And I still have that card active today, and that's something to keep in mind. Or just having that mature conversation on, while you're a senior in high school, you're going to be an adult. You maybe already are an adult. So what are your plans for your life and your career? And what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, just having that conversation, feel comfortable with their, taking the responsibility with that and adding them to your card, that will help build their credit score as well, or opening a new account together. That way, having set a lower limit so, things don't get out of hand, but that will definitely help with the credit score.
Should one be investing in retirement more so than paying off a student loan? Or how should we be thinking about balancing those two competing, goals?
So Keith alluded to this earlier in the presentation. If you have an employer match, we definitely want to take advantage of that, because that's free money on the table there. And we don't want future you to be upset at current you there because you're not saving for retirement. So we got to at least get to the match. And then from there, it's an interest rate arbitrage on how the interest rate and the student loan, how high that is versus what your risk tolerance is for investing in general. So if, for easy numbers, you're a conservative investor and you're only comfortable with a 5% return and your student loan is 7%, then we maybe look at paying down the student loan and not contributing more than the employer match with the 401k. But that's more of a rule of thumb. It really just comes down to your specific situation on how much is appropriate for you.
When it comes to paying down some of those debts, a question we've received is it a good tactic sticking with, say, the snowball strategy for 6 months or for a certain amount of time, and then switching over to the avalanche strategy for 6 months or going back and forth between the two? Or is it better to stick with one and stay with that strategy?
Yeah, so it's good to just stick with something that works for you and just stick with it over time. So if you're going all in on the avalanche strategy, focusing on credit card debt and then the lower interest rate debt last, then if that works for you, great. If not, then focus on the smallest balance debt and then end at the largest balance debt last. But it's just important to write it down. And I've worked with some clients where, they have other concerning debts on top of credit card debt, like IRS back taxes, for example. That's an agency you don't want exactly knocking at your door. So you want to deal with that at the same time you're dealing with the credit card debt, even though it's a lower interest rate. So what I'm saying is just write it down and stick to something that works for you.
Exactly. It depends on what works best for you. With the avalanche method, where you're tackling the high interest, obviously you're going to save the most money because you're paying the higher interest ones first. With snowball method, where you're tackling the small balances, it's very motivational. So if you need that extra motivation to see that you knocked out one credit card and you're going to the next one, then that is, you can definitely do that as well. From that question, yeah, it makes sense. If you need that extra motivation every 6 months to get rid of one of the credit cards, if you want to switch and that works for you, that is also a strategy. So, if you need that extra motivation, go with the snowball. But in the long run, with the avalanche method, where you're paying the highest interest, it'll save you the most amount of money.
If you have large credit card debt, would you recommend potentially using a personal loan to pay off at a lower interest rate? Something that Credit Karma has proposed to an individual. They're looking for a little bit of guidance here.
Yeah, and that's something we can definitely look at. And we've come across cases of like a client we worked with where it was a 13% personal loan to take out, but they had 22% interest on their credit card. So that differential of 9% was actually beneficial in their case. But we just want you to be wary of some predatory agencies with these personal loans because we've seen some exorbitant rates that are well north of credit card debt, interest rates of 29%. So it's a strategy that can be used, but we just want to make sure that it's in your best interest when you sign that paperwork.
Actually, Arash and Henry, I just have a quick question. As far as these credit repair agencies and paying them fees and things like that, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we've worked with them a couple of times. They can be helpful.
But the individual can essentially reach out to the card companies directly, right? And almost do the same thing and negotiate interest rates and things like that. So yeah, I was just totally curious what your thoughts were on that because we haven't discussed that.
I've seen people have success with these credit agencies that they do the talking for you. But I actually did this for a friend of mine many years ago. I called the credit card company with him and negotiated a lower balance. It will impact your credit score. But if you have a large amount of debt, let's say $30,000 or $20,000 credit card, and you just can't pay it, you could call them, negotiate it. They'll knock down the debt down to, let's say, knock down 60-70% of it, and you end up paying only 30%. But then, you're impacted your credit score for a number of years. You have to build it back up. But sometimes you're just in that situation, and you could always call these credit card companies and negotiate that. Just get a letter on hand from them specifically saying that they're forgiving the debt. So, they can come back after you again later on.
Got it.
Mhm.
Perfect. Thank you.
We have someone that has a young daughter, about 4 years old, whose pre-K tuition's is about $10,000 a year. And they'd like to try to escape the taxes that they pay on that $10,000. Are there any vehicles, any strategies that they might be able to, pay that tuition on, say, a pre-tax basis?
Yeah, I mean, if it's a private school, you can use a 529 plan for those expenses. That's something that you can look into. And as far as investing into the 529 plan, since you're pulling it out pretty close to when they actually use it, then we recommend it just keeping it in something stable like a money market fund, just so you have access and it's not going to fluctuate with the markets so much. So that is an avenue you can use. Typically 529 plans are more for college, but you can use them for private school tuition in undergrad, or I guess pre-college education.
Yep. Well, changed a little bit ago. You didn't used to be able to do that actually, but now you can. So, yeah.
Yeah. And there's other things like if you don't use the full balance within the 529 and you've held it for 15 years, that turns into a Roth IRA. You can contribute up to the contribution limits each year until you get to $35,000 out of the 529 plan. You can put that into a Roth IRA and you're helping out your child or loved one's retirement at that point. So there's other options that can be done with the 529 plan. But we just, again, want to make sure that you're taken care of first, and then we can focus on other loved ones and your children.
We have someone who received a new credit card because their old one had expired. They didn't activate it, and the new card ended up being closed since they didn't use it for a couple of years. They're curious, does something like that hurt their credit score?
I am not sure how
Yeah, I'm
much
not
it
sure on
does,
that.
yeah, because I personally, what, I realized a few weeks ago, Best Buy closed my credit card because I never used it, but I don't think it impacted my credit card that much. I think if the card was very old, so you had it for like 10, 15 years and it got closed, I think that would because of that history that you're losing with the card. But something that was just recently you had, I don't think it impacts it that much, especially if you have other credit cards on hand that you're using and utilizing.
Are there any rules of thumb around how much you should be trying to save in your 401k or your employer-sponsored retirement plan by the time you're ready to retire? And any ideas, strategies, and how to translate that kind of end savings goal into how much they should be contributing now. So I guess sort of a two-part question. Good rules of thumb around how much to sort of build up in your retirement nest egg by the time you retire. And then the secondary part being, how do you think about turning that into, each month saving a certain amount as far as the contribution that's needed to fund that final goal?
Yeah, there's a couple of working parts with that question. First thing I'm gonna mention is, again, we want to take advantage of any employer-sponsored plans and at least get up to that match, because again, that's free money on the table. So get up to that. And then the next part of that question depends on when you want to retire. So if you're someone who wants to retire early and say their mid-50s, something like that, then it would be prudent to also have a taxable investment account so that you can use that while you're in that age of pre-59 and a half, where you would have that 10% penalty if you took from a qualified plan or IRA too early. Then that's a strategy that can be used. And really, it just amounts to how much you're able to save and contribute and live comfortably. If you're looking to say retire at 65, then we look at Roth 401k versus traditional 401k and your tax brackets at the time of retirement versus late into retirement on which would be a more beneficial contribution to you. But to really answer your question, we would have to look at your specific situation and your cash flow and when you want to retire and what your goals are in order to answer that effectively. But those are just some rules of thumb that you can follow.
Right. To Henry's point, if you have high interest debt outside of the 401 and you're younger, you want to tackle that first. But many, and Braden, maybe actually you could speak to this. A lot of the plans that we work with, they have those auto escalation programs where you kind of set it on autopilot too, right?
Sure. So your employer sponsored plan may have a feature through your retirement plan record keeper that actually allows you to kind of turn on an increase in your contributions on an annual basis. So sometimes it's called automatic escalation of contributions. And what it does is each year it bumps up your deferral percentage into your retirement plan by say 1%, or you could turn that to be 2% per year. So that you're gradually increasing your savings rate over time to sort of hit that target that you're looking at. We got a couple questions around how do you suggest, what questions should I be asking? What are the things I should be looking for in a financial advisor to help me with these types of things that we're talking about today?
Sure. So just make sure that you're working with somebody who is a fiduciary, which is just a way of saying that your best interests are top of mind and they're focusing on you and they're not focusing on themselves and their wallet. So our firm is a fiduciary, or just again work with another firm that you're happy with that also is a fiduciary there.
Yeah, and I mean, Arash, Henry, and I are all certified financial planners, so that automatically makes us fiduciary. So it's always your best interest that come first by law. So I think, what is it? Let's make a plan.org, where you can actually go find a CFP. Some questions to ask would include, how are you paid?
Yeah.
I would highly recommend going, if you Google brokercheck.com, you can see my background, everyone on this call, to see if there are any disclosures. So you want to do your due diligence. That will save you a trip into the office if there's an issue with the background or anything like that. So definitely brokercheck.com. It's a great starting point. The CFP website, let's make a plan.org, and make sure they're fiduciaries, ask how they get paid, and interview multiple advisors as well.
Definitely, those are great points. Again, making sure fiduciary, looking it up online, making sure they don't have any negative disclosures, and also looking at their education background, what certifications they have, their investment philosophy. You want to see, does that investment philosophy that they're telling you, which is the way you like to invest? Are they conservative, more aggressive? What type of products they invest in, and the fee structure of those products and the fees that they're charging you. So in the long run, some of these things, such as the fees in a small amount, can compound to a large figure. So you want to be mindful of that as well.
For an individual who is currently on a save plan for student loan repayment, is it better to try to pay more than say the minimum amount or the minimum frequency? Or is it better to sort of pay the allotted amount, just stick with sort of the monthly or the allotted payment schedule? Or would that differ between, individual to individual?
It would differ a bit individual to individual. My gut says most likely just pay what the minimum is because you already got that restructured. So we can take a look at that and see what's most beneficial for you on paying that down faster or just sticking with the monthly minimum that you have as you restructured it. But we're happy to revisit that in either case.
And then last question that we have so far today is in the industry, in the advisory industry, is there an average cost or is there a typical fee to get help with these types of things that you see out there in the marketplace? Not just, whatever we would charge clients, but are there some rules of thumb, some tips that you would give individuals when they're looking at fees and they're comparing advisors and who's best for them? In terms of cost, what should they be looking at?
So for example, just to use our firm, we do a flat 1% fee. Depending, we can also do 0.65. It really just depends on the situation and how much work and what the capacity is in our role as advisor. But there's no other bells and whistles to it. It's just a percentage of assets. There's some advisors that Arash was looking to that have products that they like to put in front of you that may or may not be beneficial to you, and they're earning a commission on that. So they could be earning a 1% fee, for example, which is typically the industry average is 1%. On top of that, they might do a commissionable product where you're paying 5% upfront just to be in the product as well. So those are things to keep in mind. And again, we stress reading the fine print when it comes to this stuff, because it's your money and you should know how it's being allocated.
Okay.
Yes, and also a lot of financial advisors, just like us, we have a free consultation. For a first session, you can ask questions, share more about your specific situation to get a better estimate for whether it's only a financial plan and how much that would cost, or whether it was you're investing your funds in for retirement, and that fee structure may be different. So it does go back to a unique specific situation, and just like us, a lot of financial advisors do offer the free financial consultation meeting, and be happy to do that for you as well if you have any questions.
Well, we're coming up here on time today. Did want to thank our presenters again. Great job, Keith, Arash, and Henry. And thank you all for your time today. We hope you have a great rest of your week. I did add a PDF of the slides that we covered today in the chat. If you want to take a look at those slides, feel free to click on that and download those. And thanks again for your time today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you everyone for your time. Have a good day.